This is the point where illusions quietly lose their power. Not with noise, not with drama, but with an inner shift that feels almost unsettling. Because up until now, love may have lived in your imagination more than in reality. In hope, in projection, in the belief that time, patience, or devotion would eventually turn potential into truth. And yet something has begun to change. You feel it when the same conversations repeat, when promises circle back without becoming actions, when emotional closeness exists in words, but not in consistency. This is where relationships either mature or quietly fall apart. Carl Jung believed that the psyche reaches moments of confrontation, thresholds where the unconscious can no longer sustain illusion. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is exactly such a threshold. Fantasy is comforting. It allows us to believe in who someone could be, instead of facing who they are choosing to be right now. Fantasy softens disappointment and postpones truth. But emotional reality does not negotiate. And when reality arrives, it does not shout. It simply asks one question: is there reciprocity here, or only longing? At this stage, many women feel an unfamiliar tension inside themselves. Not anger, not resentment, but clarity beginning to press against hope. You start noticing effort instead of intention, presence instead of potential. You become aware of what is actually happening rather than what you keep explaining away. In Jung's view, growth happens when the ego can no longer defend its story. When the narrative collapses, the self steps forward. That is why this phase feels heavy and sacred at the same time. Something old is dissolving, but something truer is being born. This is not the end of love. It is the end of unconscious love. Here, relationships are asked to deepen, to become grounded in responsibility, emotional availability, and mutual presence. And if they cannot, they reveal their limit. You may feel fear now, because reality removes the comfort of excuses, but it also returns your power. This is the beginning of emotional adulthood, where love is no longer a dream you maintain alone, but a living exchange that must meet you fully. And as we move forward together, you will begin to recognize this moment not as a loss, but as the place where your self-respect quietly steps into the light. When fantasy dissolves, it leaves behind silence. Not an empty silence, but a revealing one. The kind that exposes what effort has been real and what has only been imagined. This is where many women feel an internal conflict begin. One part still wants to believe. Another part has started to see. You notice how much emotional labor you've been carrying, how often you've filled in gaps with understanding, how frequently you've explained behavior that left you feeling unseen. And this is not because you are naive. It's because you are capable of deep attachment. Carl Jung described this moment as the confrontation with the shadow, not the shadow of the other person, but your own. As Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. What is becoming conscious now is how much you've adapted yourself to keep the connection alive. At this stage, relationships are no longer sustained by chemistry alone. They require maturity, consistency, emotional accountability. Fantasy thrives where there is ambiguity. Reality demands clarity. And clarity is uncomfortable because it removes hope as a bargaining tool. You can no longer say, maybe later. You can no longer wait for potential to wake up. This is the point where the dynamic shifts. Either both people step forward, or one remains standing alone. You begin to sense that love cannot be built on emotional guessing. That depth without stability becomes exhaustion. That connection without responsibility becomes confusion. In Jung's view, true intimacy begins only after projection ends. When we stop projecting our inner longings onto another person, we finally see who stands before us. And this seeing changes everything. You may feel grief here, not for what was, but for what you hoped it would become. Yet something stronger is forming beneath that grief. Discernment. You start asking different questions. Not, how do I make this work? But does this meet me where I am? This is not hardness. This is emotional integrity. Because a relationship that matures does not ask you to shrink your awareness. It expands with you. And if it breaks at this point, it is not because you asked for too much. It is because the foundation could not hold the truth. This is where your inner compass awakens. And once awakened, it will never allow you to unsee what you now know. Once the inner compass awakens, it begins to speak in sensations rather than thoughts. A tightening in the chest. A quiet withdrawal of enthusiasm. A growing fatigue that no amount of explanation can soothe. This is not indifference. It is your psyche refusing to live in contradiction any longer. You start to realize that love built on fantasy always asks you to wait, to be patient beyond reason, to understand more than is returned, to believe that endurance is proof of depth. But emotional reality does not reward endurance alone. It responds to presence. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the moment when a person stops living according to borrowed expectations and begins living from inner truth. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And this stage in relationships is exactly that privilege, though it rarely feels gentle. You notice now how often you minimized your needs to avoid tension. How often you chose harmony over honesty. How frequently you silenced your intuition so the connection could survive. This is where maturity is demanded from both sides. A relationship that matures meets discomfort with responsibility. It listens instead of deflecting. It adjusts instead of disappearing. It stays present when clarity replaces charm. But a relationship built on fantasy begins to fracture here. Because fantasy cannot tolerate accountability. It dissolves when asked to be consistent. You may feel an urge to explain yourself one last time, to offer understanding again, to soften the truth so it doesn't feel like rejection. Yet something deeper now resists that impulse. You are no longer trying to be chosen. You are observing whether the other person is capable of choosing. In Jung's view, projection ends when we reclaim the qualities we assign to another. You begin to see that the strength you admired, the depth you hoped for, the commitment you waited on, were always alive within you first. This realization changes your posture. Your voice becomes calmer. Your questions become fewer. Your silence becomes more honest. And the relationship feels this shift immediately. Because this is the point where love stops being sustained by hope and begins being measured by reality. What happens next determines everything. At this point, the relationship enters a narrow passage. There is no space left for pretending, no room for emotional fog. Reality now asks for alignment. You notice how the other person responds when the tone changes, when you stop over-explaining, when you stop softening your expectations, when you stop carrying the emotional momentum alone. This is the psychological dividing line. A relationship that is ready to mature leans in here. It becomes more attentive, more grounded, more real. Not perfect, but responsible. But a relationship built on fantasy reacts differently. It resists. It deflects. It accuses you of changing. And in a way you have. Carl Jung described this moment as the ego's resistance to growth. As Jung said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. When emotional reality appears, immature dynamics try to escape discomfort rather than grow through it. You begin to see this clearly now. When you speak calmly, you are met with avoidance. When you ask for presence, you are offered explanations. When you ask for consistency, you are given promises. And your body knows the difference. This is where you stop negotiating with truth. You stop turning insight into self-doubt. You stop wondering if you are asking for too much. Because emotional adulthood does not feel dramatic. It feels steady. You realize that love does not require confusion to be intense. It does not need instability to feel alive. It does not need effort from only one side to survive. In Jung's view, relationships mirror our stage of consciousness. When one person grows and the other resists, tension is inevitable. Not because love has failed, but because growth is uneven. This is where many connections break. Not because affection disappears, but because reality demands structure, and you are no longer willing to live without it. You feel yourself stepping back, not in protest, but in alignment. You are no longer chasing clarity. You are waiting to see if it arrives on its own. This pause is powerful, because now the relationship must reveal its capacity to mature or to end, and either outcome will finally be honest. After the pause comes the revelation, not because you demand answers, but because truth surfaces when you stop compensating for what is missing. You notice how the relationship behaves without your emotional effort holding it together. Whether communication deepens or thins, whether care becomes visible or disappears, whether presence becomes intentional or remains convenient. This is the moment where maturity reveals itself without words. Carl Jung believed that relationships function as mirrors of inner development. As Jung said, where love rules, there is no will to power. And here, power struggles fade, leaving only one question. Can this connection stand on equal ground? You begin to feel something unfamiliar but stabilizing. Detachment without bitterness. Clarity without hostility. You are no longer waiting for reassurance. You are watching behavior. This is where fantasy finally ends. Not because you give up, but because you no longer need illusion to feel connected. You need reality. And reality either meets you or steps aside. A relationship that matures now becomes quieter, deeper, more deliberate. Words align with actions. Time becomes intentional. Care becomes consistent. But a relationship that cannot mature reacts to your calm as a threat. It feels your groundedness as distance. It experiences your self-respect as loss of control. And that response tells you everything. In Jung's view, when a person cannot grow with you, they will attempt to pull you back into the familiar. Guilt, nostalgia, and confusion become tools to restore the old dynamic. But you are no longer available for that. You stand differently now. You no longer fear endings that reveal truth. You no longer chase emotional security from someone who cannot offer it. This is not withdrawal. It is alignment. And from this place, whatever continues with you must be real. What follows alignment is not certainty, it is self-trust. And this is where the deepest shift occurs. You stop interpreting silence. You stop decoding mixed signals. You stop searching for meaning in inconsistency. Because emotional reality has taught you something irreversible. Clarity does not need translation. Carl Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Here, the reaction is no longer explosive. It is revealing. You notice how little you need to say now, how your presence alone carries weight, how your boundaries no longer feel like defenses, but like orientation. This is the stage where fantasy tries one last time to return. Through nostalgia, through selective memory, through the temptation to remember intensity instead of truth. But you no longer confuse intensity with depth. A relationship that matures here accepts limits without resistance. It understands that closeness grows from respect, not access. It meets your steadiness with steadiness of its own. But a relationship that cannot evolve experiences your groundedness as absence, because it relied on your emotional flexibility to survive. In Jung's view, when projection ends, love either becomes real or collapses under its own illusion. There is no third option. You feel this now in your body. The relief of not overfunctioning. The calm of not chasing. The dignity of standing in truth without explanation. You are no longer afraid of losing the relationship, because you have stopped losing yourself. And this is the psychological point of no return, where fantasy ends not in disappointment, but in liberation. From here on, whatever stays with you does so by choice, not by hope. After liberation comes a quieter phase, one that few people talk about. The phase where nothing dramatic happens. yet everything inside has shifted. You are no longer waiting for proof. You are no longer bracing for disappointment. You are simply present with what is. This is where emotional reality settles into the body. Carl Jung understood this stage as integration, the moment when insight is no longer intellectual, but lived. As Jung said, knowledge rests not upon truth alone, but upon error also. You now see clearly where you hoped instead of observed, waited instead of listened, endured instead of asked. And instead of shame, there is compassion. You forgive yourself for believing, for loving deeply, for staying longer than you should have. Because you now understand that fantasy was not weakness, it was a stage of development. But remaining in it would have been abandonment of the self. At this point, the relationship no longer defines your emotional state. Its presence does not elevate you. Its absence does not diminish you. This is maturity. If the other person steps forward now, it is no longer to be convinced, but to participate. And if they do not, the loss feels different than before. Cleaner, sad, but not destabilizing. You no longer collapse into what if. You remain anchored in what is. In Jung's view, the self becomes whole when it no longer needs external validation to feel real. And this is exactly what you are experiencing. A quiet wholeness that does not announce itself, but changes how you move through the world. You speak less, but mean more. You expect less illusion, but more truth. You allow fewer people close, but those who come near feel it. This is the stage where love, if it continues, must meet you at eye level. And if it ends, it does so without destroying you. Because emotional reality has given you something fantasy never could. Ground beneath your feet. And now, you are ready for what comes next, not because you hope for it, but because you can meet it without losing yourself. With grounding comes discernment, and discernment changes what you allow into your emotional space. You begin to notice how differently you respond now. You no longer rush toward connection. You no longer fill silence with effort. You no longer mistake attention for commitment. This is not caution born from fear. It is clarity born from experience. Carl Jung believed that maturity emerges when we stop seeking completion through another and instead relate from wholeness. As Jung said, loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. Now, you no longer communicate from urgency, but from truth. You feel it when someone approaches you without depth. Your body remains calm, but closed. You listen, but you do not lean forward. And when someone meets you with presence, real presence, you recognize it immediately. Not because it overwhelms you, but because it feels stable. This is where emotional reality reshapes desire. You are no longer drawn to unpredictability. You are no longer seduced by intensity that lacks direction. You are no longer impressed by charm without consistency. Instead, you are drawn to coherence. To someone whose actions do not require interpretation. To someone who does not disappear when reality enters the room. A relationship that matures here becomes slower, but deeper. It respects rhythm. It honors emotional timing. It does not demand access before trust is built. And if no one stands there yet, you do not panic. Because solitude no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like alignment. In Jung's view, when the self is integrated, it no longer chases symbols of love. It recognizes love through lived experience. And this recognition protects you from repeating the same pattern. You no longer bond through fixing. You no longer attach through endurance. You no longer stay where your growth is inconvenient. This stage quietly rewrites your future relationships, not through rules, but through inner standards. And those standards are no longer negotiable. Because once fantasy has ended and reality has been faced, you cannot unknow what it feels like to be emotionally awake. And from this place, love, if it comes, must be real. At this stage, something subtle but irreversible has settled within you. You no longer enter connections hoping they will become something. You enter them observing what they already are. This is where emotional reality becomes embodied wisdom. Carl Jung viewed this as the moment when the inner feminine, the part that knows, senses, and perceives truth, regains authority. As Jung said, intuition does not explain, it reveals. And now, you trust what is revealed without asking it to justify itself. You feel it early, in the way conversations unfold, in how plans are made or avoided, in how presence feels steady or conditional. You no longer need time to convince yourself. Your body already knows. This is the point where relationships stop being tests of endurance and become reflections of self-respect. You are no longer trying to prove your worth through loyalty, patience, or sacrifice. You are allowing others to show whether they can meet you without effortful translation. A relationship that matures here feels mutual without calculation. Both people take responsibility for emotional tone. Both notice disconnection and address it. Both understand that intimacy requires participation, not assumption. But a relationship that cannot mature fades quietly, not with conflict, but with irrelevance, because it no longer fits who you are becoming. In Jung's view, when the psyche integrates its lessons, repetition ends. The same pattern loses its grip because the inner position has changed. And this is exactly what is happening now. You no longer feel tempted to go back. You no longer romanticize unfinished stories. You no longer question your clarity. You are not colder. You are clearer. And this clarity does not harden you, it refines you. You remain open, but no longer porous. Warm, but no longer self-sacrificing. Loving, but no longer self-erasing. This is where relationships either rise to meet your reality or gently dissolve, unable to follow you forward. And for the first time, you do not grieve what cannot come with you, because you finally understand. Maturity is not something you wait for in another, it is something you live. And now, you stand at the quiet conclusion of this passage, not an ending marked by loss, but by truth. This is where emotional reality becomes your home, where you no longer wonder if you are asking for too much, where you no longer measure love by how much you can endure. Carl Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." You have integrated hope with discernment, love with self-respect, desire with clarity. This is why relationships can no longer remain unconscious around you. If someone walks beside you now, they must do so awake, not half-present, not hiding behind charm, not sustained by your patience alone. Here, love matures, or it ends. And if it ends, it does not shatter you, because you are no longer building your identity inside someone else's uncertainty. You understand now that emotional reality is not cold. It is honest. It does not promise forever. It offers presence. It does not seduce. It stabilizes. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all arrives here. You were never afraid of being alone. You were afraid of seeing clearly. Now you see. You see that fantasy kept you waiting, but reality sets you free. You see that maturity does not arrive with intensity, but with responsibility. You see that real love does not ask you to disappear. It asks you to arrive fully. And from this place, whatever relationship comes next will not be built on projection, longing, or hope alone. It will be built on truth. This is the psychological point where everything changes, where love either grows roots or reveals it never had them. And you move forward whole,